Okay, Desert Mountain members, welcome back to another edition of the Desert Mountain Podcast. My name is Patrick McKenzie, and I've got a very special co-host with me today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, Patrick, John Lyberger here. How are you?
All doing great. So excited to have you here. We got a couple of other special guests here with us today. Go ahead and introduce them for us, please.
We do. So thank you for that. First time on a podcast, and obviously, why not start as a co-host?
Right.
Today, we're very fortunate to have our handicap chairman, Greg Castor, and our tournament director, Sean Ferris. For those that are listening to this podcast, you're probably wondering, what's this all about? This thing called Cap Patrol. So, by being a club that has a USGA handicap program, we have a license with the USGA, and we have a responsibility to have a golf committee and also a handicap committee. The handicap committee is responsible for ensuring that all member clubs monitor those players' handicaps, and they ensure that a player's handicap index is reflective of that player's potential. And we're very fortunate to have a hardworking handicap committee. Greg, thank you and your team for what you've done in the last year, taking over from Mr. Zeke. And I think we're on our way to some really good stuff. We can get into Cap Patrol in a minute, but maybe you might want to reflect a little bit on what your committee's done this year and, what the handicap committee's full responsibility is.
Sure. Thanks, John. And happy to be on my first podcast as well.
Yes.
I've listened to the last few, Patrick.
We appreciate that.
These are great.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
They're kind of fun, and they're informative, so hopefully this one will be the same. The reflections on the last year are kind of interesting. I remember you telling me, John, that, pretty easy. Mostly heavy lifting is done by the club, which is true. Sean's team does a great job. But I take a bit of abuse. The handicap chairman is usually the least liked guy on the, in our case, on the mountain. So we've tried to make it fair, though, and we have a great committee, a mix of people of both handicaps and gender in terms of folks, and some very good participants. Marty Babst is our local data analyst, and John Hall keeps us straight with all the gross golfers, and we've got some folks that help in higher handicaps and what they're thinking about. But really, what we focus on more than anything is the tournaments, right? And we do try to make sure everybody posts their rounds. It's kind of one of the responsibilities or requirements of the USGA to post your rounds. So I'll put in another plug. Everybody post your rounds. But really, we focus on the tournaments and in particular making sure those as fair and equitable as possible. And so, we're going to spend some time today on Cap Patrol. We've done a lot of it with the tournament index, which we can talk a little bit about historically how we've used that. But that's had some great things, but some challenges, particularly as we've added so many new members, which we can touch on a little bit later.
So let me just jump in real quick. So for tournaments, we've used this tournament index, this T-index software for many, many years. And when the USGA switched over to the World Handicap program, it kind of allowed the door to open for some other opportunities to enhance this ability to calculate a tournament index. And we found this awesome software that a lot of our other peer clubs have been using called Cap Patrol. Cap Patrol measures and analyzes 42 different data points. Is that right, Sean?
Correct.
And it allows us the opportunity to go in and I'll let you guys kind of speak a little bit more about kind of the 5 key data points that it really works off of. We feel that this enhancement to the T index or the tournament index system is really going to create a much more level playing field for our members and for tournament play as well. So that we thank you for. Let's talk a little bit about how it works. Maybe Sean, you can jump in and tell us a little bit about how the Cap Patrol system works.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
And maybe what it is.
Well, we'll start with that. We'll start what is Cap Patrol, because that's going to be the biggest question
Absolutely.
that everybody's going to have. Cap Patrol is a software that allows the Handicap Committee really to gather information based on GIN. It's GIN and Desert Mountain tournament results, but allows those that data to formulate into a equation that produces a result that says somebody's playing better than their potential based on, like you said, 42 factors, 5 key areas. Mm-hmm. Is somebody playing better than potential more often than they should be? Everybody that plays golf wants to play their potential. And the USGA handicap system boils down to your handicap is a mark of your potential. It's not your average. So USGA and the Handicap Committee are always looking to make sure that a club has golfers that are posting scores and have handicaps that are to their potential. Cap Patrol measures all the different data points to basically say, is this player's handicap reflective of their potential, or is it something other than that? And I think if we've ever have any feedback from members on events and group play, league play, it's usually revolving around somebody that really exceeded their potential. And I think you mentioned a few minutes ago comparing it to what we've been doing, which is T-index. Mm-hmm. And that's a factor that if you play in Desert Mountain tournaments, you're very well aware of the term T-index. T-index was a good system that we used for the past 8 years that basically looked at your Desert Mountain tournament scores and said, okay, if you're playing Desert Mountain tournaments, you shot a score. And that score over time, those scores over time, are really reflective of a mini index. If you consider all the scores you play producing your index, your tournament index is just reflective of your tournament play and all those scores producing your potential in tournament play as a comparison to your GIN. And it was good because someone who played really well in tournaments or had some really good rounds in tournaments would reflect in their T-index. Mm-hmm. But based on the feedback from members over the past few years, there were some things that, would come up every once in a while. Well, what about this? I think the Handicap Committee did a great job the past year of really focusing on mispostings. Isn't mispostings an indicator that somebody may not be playing to their potential? Because if you've missed a posting, how do you know that your index is really your potential? So the Handicap Committee did a great job in focusing some efforts towards making sure all the members of the club were posting their scores and not having any mispostings. But other things would come up, like, what about away scores? Here's a person who shoots really high at away scores, but doesn't on their home scores. Isn't that something the Handicap Committee should look at? Well, yeah, it is something we should look at. And it is something the Handicap Committee does look at. Another one that would come up is what about someone who just wins a lot of tournaments? John will look at me and say, Sean sure stands on the podium an awful lot. That doesn't seem like he's playing. He seems like he's exceeding his potential. So if you look at those things that we would get feedback from members, Cap Patrol actually addresses all of those. And in addition, it does enhance what we've always been doing, which is looking at mispostings and looking at tournament scores. It does look at those things. And in addition to it, looks at several other key factors that basically gives you a more robust way of looking at somebody's potential, their index versus tournament play, and whether they're playing a level playing field when they come into a tournament. You want to know, Greg Castor wants to know if he comes into a Desert Mountain tournament, is he playing on a level playing field with all the other members that are playing in there? And it's the Handicap Committee's job to look at that and say, we're doing what the USGA has asked us, which is make sure everybody's playing to their potential and not, I hate to say manipulating, but we know that happens. But also, what other factors could cause somebody's index to go up more than it should? Right.
And let's jump into that. So let's talk a little bit about how Cap Patrol works. You mentioned the 42 different evaluations that Cap Patrol will look at one's data or score. But let's talk about those 5 key ones. Maybe you and Greg can kind of sort through those a little bit. I know the first one is the high and low index over the last 12 months. That's a key factor. How does that play into this?
Well, Sean's touched on a couple of the different components. We'll piece it together here. But high and low index, the theory is that, for me, if I take my example, I've been as low as a 9 and as high as a 13. So if I get up towards 13 just before the tournaments, clearly within the last 12 months, I've been able to play a lot better than a 13. So it's one of several factors that they'll look at and say, okay, well, could he be, in theory, be playing better than that 13 that he's at, or 12 or whatever he's at the moment? That would be the first one. It's not the highest factor, but it's one of the key factors.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, you bring up a good point, which is it doesn't look at any one category as the indicator that something is off. It looks at all the factors and says, okay, if you, let's say, use the term a red flag pops up for any reason, if several red flags are popping up, that might be an indication that somebody is probably playing better. Their potential is better than what their current index might indicate. So for the example you just brought up, a high and low handicap, if somebody's just increasing close to their highest handicap in the past 12 months and their low handicap is considerably different, that might trip a red flag. But it's not the only thing. There could be other factors.
I was going to ask, what other kind of red flags would be?
Well, that would be a red flag if it was close to the tournament time,
sure.
too.
Right, but then you look at if their tournament history says they never really win tournaments, or if their tournament scoring record says they don't play well in tournaments, or if their home scores are considerably higher than their away scores. If they measures the other factors, that one factor of a red flag may not trip somebody to say that their index is not their potential. But if you compare it to some of those other categories that I just mentioned, it may.
Yeah, the second one is home versus away.
Well, I was gonna, how many home scores are usually? Is that
well, it's an interesting,
a regular occurrence?
It's a funny thing. So I'll bet you it'd be interesting when George gets here. He's going to be here. He's the guy that invented this software. He's going to be here for a session that we're going to run tomorrow, actually. But I'm interested to ask him. Normally, one thing that's hard for us to check, as Sean touched on, is away scores, right? We can do some peer-reviewed checks on how well somebody's playing versus what they post, at least in a piecemeal way. But on away scores, you really can't. And so this has a factor that looks at, okay, well, maybe if you wanted to manipulate your handicap, it's probably the easiest way to do it because we don't really have a good way to do it.
Sure.
And again, we don't think people are doing that by and large, but, in a club of 4,000 people, there's some that will. And so it looks at away scores versus home scores. And if you saw a lot of higher scores in away, that might raise a flag.
So you mentioned earlier potential. How does one's potential play into this as one of the key elements and the key factors?
Well, specifically when you're talking about home versus away, I'll take a step back. We talked about 5 criteria, and that's what we're talking about right now, the 5 major criteria that Cap Patrol will look at. But there's 42 indicators within those 5 criteria. So let's take one. We just talked about home versus away. What the Cap Patrol calculation will look at is somebody of the same potential as myself, and what does their away scores and home scoring look like? And the other people in that same category. Now, if somebody's away scores are significantly different than other people of their same ability, that's a red flag. So that's a kind of a data point behind the data point, and there's several of those within the system. And to be honest, we should probably lay this out ahead of time, but it's a proprietary algorithm by Cap Patrol. They don't tell us the calculation. They'll tell us the 5 categories and tell us that there's those other things measured behind the scene, but they're not going to give us the calculation because that's their business.
Sure.
But it's just taking your GIN data, which is there. It's basically your scores you posted, and you ask the question, what's the typical home versus away posting? It's different for everybody. We have a lot of members of Desert Mountain that you look at their scoring record, and it's Desert Mountain, Desert Mountain, Desert Mountain, Desert Mountain, Desert Mountain. You look at some people that we have that move in different clubs, and it might be Desert Mountain once every 10 scores because they have other clubs that they play at as well. So home and away tends to be different for every golfer, but the one thing that should be consistent across golfers, if the data is there, is that you're not too much of a different player home versus away. You might be a little different. I go to a course I'm not familiar with, I might shoot a little higher. But so should everybody else of my same ability.
I was going to ask, I'm relatively, I do understand handicap and all that, but I never thought of does the difficulty of a course factor into it? Are there certain levels of difficulty for a course that would factor into any of these?
That's a great question because that's exactly how the USGA bases their whole handicap system off is that you as a golfer are going to play every course differently. How do we quantify you as a golfer into one number that represents that? And what the USGA has done a very good job over the years at is evaluating, rating, and sloping all the golf courses that the 4 of us right here can go play any golf course and any tee on any golf course, and the score we post will reflect who we are numerically based on the difficulty of the course we played and the type of golfer we are. So you as if let's just say we both are a 10 handicap, we're both 10.0, right? So yeah, I'm actually probably playing that right now. Yeah, exactly. If we're both 10.0, but you play the white tees, I play the blue tees, and you might play let's say, a flat golf course in the valley, and I'm playing Chiricahua, how can we both be the same golfer? Well, we may not if we both played the same tees on the same course that day. The USGA would adjust our index to a course playing handicap that would equate fairly for both of us.
Okay.
But that number is, I like to refer to it as your index is your traveling number. That's the number you take to any course, any tee, and adjust it to who the golfer you are at that course that day.
I didn't realize how intricate this is like baseball stats almost. We're getting pretty in depth here.
And with the new world handicap system, that's what they tried to do. They tried to, because the RNA would kind of have one way of doing it, and the USGA had another way of doing it. So they tried to make it all one now worldwide. So you could travel with your index to Europe or Asia, and everybody would play on the same playing field under the same handicap criteria.
Yeah.
Okay. And, interesting.
John, since you mentioned that, I want to throw one thing out there that something we would go back to talking about T-index versus where we're going with Cap Patrol. One thing that we as a handicap committee, and Greg can speak to this, is that the system we were using, Handicap Server, which produced the T-index, it was not transitioned well into the World Handicap system, the World Handicap system. So we have been looking for a better way to fairly evaluate the golfers in our tournaments at Desert Mountain with a system that is World Handicap, I say use compliant. They both are adequate at measuring. This one is more adequate, a better tool for measuring because it is 100% based on the World Handicap system. So therefore the data is being adjusted as the World Handicap system would, as the USGA would want us to use it. That's compliant.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I'm pretty excited about it. I think, John touched on what are the 5 factors. So we touched on low versus high index over the 12 months. We talked about home versus away. And you started to talk a little bit about potential. Potential is what dinged me, by the way. So I'm going to have one of these new tournament indexes. Yes. Well, I've had some good success over the last year or so playing in tournaments. And in fact, I think if I remember right, I've played in like 15 tournaments, and my index for tournament scores is like a 8.9. And again, my index is now, close to 11 or so. So, this is a flag that's actually a bigger flag than most, and Sean probably knows better than I do. But this is one that factors most. I tend to play better under pressure when every putt counts, when the card is attested.
Ice in the veins.
I get a headache, after the round of golf and so forth. But some people don't, right? Some people play worse. And that's where this system is kind of interesting that drives us towards.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
We'll talk. Let's expand on the potential a little bit.
Go ahead.
For those keeping score now, we have 3 of the 5 major indicators, which was low versus high index, and also your current index is mixed into that as well. Home versus away postings, and the one we're going to talk about now, which is potential, and that's a broad term to use in this one. But what that category is measuring is it looks in your GIN record, and it pulls out all of Sean's tournament scores and measures them, and it pulls out Sean's regular rounds of golf and measures them. And if I'm significantly better in tournaments than I am in my regular play,
kind of like Greg.
Like we talked before, make a little red flag pops up. And like Greg mentioned, a little red flag popped up for Greg. He's playing tournament. Not in a bad way. This is a part of a bigger calculation. But certainly, like Greg mentioned, it's something that's looked at a little bit more significantly than the other ones because, let's face it, if you're playing well in tournaments, you're probably going to win some trophies, especially if it's a big difference between your regular play. Why would that be? For some reason, it's just some people play well in tournaments.
Sure.
Someone's timing. I just took my lesson 2 weeks ago. The tournament came. I was playing at my best, and then it disappeared, which happens in golf. Right? And I had to go take another lesson. And then in between tournaments, I was playing my worst. That happens. But I think what the USGA has really done well at, and what Cap Patrol is really capitalizing on, is that they've been very good at providing stats and data that they can go back to and say, hey, on average, or in the law of mathematics, you shouldn't exceed your potential that much. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be that much higher on away scores than your home scores. Mathematically, you shouldn't be close to your high index every single time you play a tournament. that's what this software does. It's basically looking at mathematically and saying the laws of probability say that you shouldn't be on the podium 5 times every year. Right. It's a law of probability says that if everybody's handicaps are equal, you probably all have an equal chance of playing. So mathematically, someone who's on the podium that often probably has something going on, and this system will level the playing field.
Well, you're getting ahead of yourself with podium.
I know, that's right. That's another one.
But on potential, it's interesting to note because one of the complaints that I got a lot from the T-index system was, these are only tournaments at Desert Mountain. I play in a member guest, on the East Coast. I play at my club, back home. Why aren't those rounds posted? Well, in some clubs, you could probably track that, at least on an honor system. But in a club with, X thousand members, it's probably bigger than any club in the country. That's kind of hard for us. And with this taking GIN data, if it's a C score, competition score in GIN, it's counted in my potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to number 4 since you touched on that, Greg. Let's talk about rounds turned in. So let's tell us a little bit about that.
Here's a topic near and dear to my heart.
I know.
We have struggled, frankly, as a club, making sure that everybody got their rounds posted. And there's lots of reasons why they don't, right? You might post your round the next day for the game that I played yesterday. You might do 9 holes instead of 18 holes and forgot to tell the club. The club might not have told you. You got practice rounds. You got all these things. But at the end of the day, over the last year, we've basically implemented some stuff that said, if you don't have all your rounds posted, you're not in the tournament. That's been a lot of hard work chasing everybody. In this instance, it's just factual. Now, you posted your rounds or you didn't post your rounds. If you didn't post your rounds, that's going to be one of the factors that affects your handicap. You might be playing in the tournament, but you might not be playing at your current index if you're not getting those rounds posted. So this is, again, is another statistical way for us to help kind of encourage posting, if you will, without, using a hard hammer and saying you can't play the round.
So no more emails going out saying you need to post your score, you need to post your score, other than the fact that prior to a tournament, we'll let people know that, you
might want to
have
post
4 mispostings. You may want to post those so that it can be factored appropriately when we get to your handicap for the tournament.
Correct. Yeah, it'd be more of a courtesy. Hey, here's some mispostings you have in your record. You might want to get those posted before the tournament comes up so that your handicap reflects accurately.
What is interesting, too, with Cap Patrol, and I'm interested to hear this when George comes out tomorrow, is that the app actually has something that says if the 4 of us here played today, tomorrow, it sends us a little note, and I haven't quite figured out how this works. We need to get everybody on the app, I think, in the club first. But it'll say that, okay, the 4 of you played Chiricahua, hope you enjoyed your round, something like that. And Sean posted a 78, Greg posted an 82, Patrick shot a 90, John shot a 08, John didn't post. So everybody sees.
You guys are giving me too much credit.
What the heck's going on here, John? And so we're hoping that peer review will help drive some of the posting as well as the accuracy.
Or Patrick may have shot 85, but he posted 90.
That's the other thing there.
So that peer review is available.
Yeah. And that was very hard for us to do. You can find peer review under GIN in the website, but you got to be really looking for it.
Absolutely.
Does total number of rounds posted, does that affect the potential score? Does that go hand in hand at all, or is that just based solely on your current index?
Well, your current index is always based off your last 20 scores in your scoring record. So the amount of rounds you play over the year might move your needle more often, but it's not going to be measured inappropriately compared to everybody else who might only play 20 rounds a year. Your 20 rounds might take place over a 2-month period. My 20 rounds might take place over a 4-month period.
That makes sense. Okay.
But we're still being measured on the same, same 20 data points within GIN.
Yeah. Okay.
So how many scores do you need to have an official handicap?
3.
3 scores.
Yep.
So that's what's measured right there, your first 3 scores, and then you're off and running.
Yeah, your best one of 3 is where it starts. So once you get that 3rd score posted, the USGA looks at your potential is your one best round out of the last 3 you played until you get to 20. So it's always proportional till you get to 20. And then it's going to count your best 8 of your last 20. So I think there's a lot of misinformation on handicaps. It is a pretty good system. If you study handicapping, it's really mathematically based, hard to – of course, there's always gray area in there because you're dealing with a large population and a lot of data, and there's always ways to look at flaws within that. But mathematically speaking, if the majority fits within this mathematics, it's safe to assume that it's easy to measure when someone's out of line with that.
Well, and your 1 and 3 was a good example, because the real challenge, only real big challenge for us with the current tournament index system, was number of rounds posted. Because if you're a new member coming to the club, and we've had a lot of new members join, and you play your first round, you shoot lights out, it happens, right? And you shoot 6 shots better than your handicap, we've got 1 of 1 rounds to count, right? And that's going to be what you play with for a while until you play to another 2.
I think you had to get to 4. You had to get to 4 rounds before you got 2.
We count even a second.
Yeah.
And that was really the biggest complaint I get, and I get it all the time. How can you count my rounds for just 1 round? My gin has 20, and so I get it, right? I mean, it wasn't perfect. It worked reasonably well, but it wasn't perfect. This addresses that.
Okay. That's terrific. So playing more tournaments.
That was always my answer.
Yeah. And speaking of which, number 5, tournament point system.
Right.
Another one that dinged me, John. Had a good year last year. I forget what I won, but I know I won first net in spring member. I was technically first net in the senior club championship, although that was second net because the person that won gross won net. So that's another.
But you're still going to be factored off of what your potential would have been. So even though you were awarded second because of the way it lined up, you still would have won the lowest score for
other way around.
No, the other way around.
Other way around.
I'll end up a second instead of first.
He took home first place hardware, but somebody else actually had a lower net score that won the gross category.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's where the team did a great job working with George and how should we count it, how should it be posted, and so forth. But this one, again, as Sean's pointed out, this one's another big factor, because if you're on the podium a lot, you're playing well in tournaments for whatever reason, and this guy from the USGA who has some calculations says that there's a point system that above and beyond that you probably should be reviewed. And
this is one of the senior executives from the USGA came up with this tournament point system, and so what Greg was just talking about there. 2 things to note about this category is we're looking at net. You are going to see that you will be or recognized for winning gross and net categories. But in the world of handicapping, if you win gross, you're playing well. There's nothing.
There's no
wrong
handicap
with
involved,
that, right?
right?
There's no manipulation of just playing well, right? What we're looking for and where points get assigned is in the net category. So as Greg just alluded to, the other thing to note about this one is, we're looking at net. That's where the points are going to add up. The second one is that just because you took home first place gross doesn't mean you're not going to show up in the net side. And that's what Greg was talking about before. Greg took home first place net hardware, but the person that won first place gross hardware actually had a lower net score than Greg. So even in the world of hardware, we recognized them differently. In the world of Cap Patrol, they're getting points accumulated by their true net standings.
Gotcha.
Whether gross or net. We group everybody together and award first through fifth place net points.
Pretty much like our betting, right? Like
it is.
They don't give me first net money.
Right.
They give me second net money. Right. But that's a big category and an important one.
Yeah, and I think any club, and going back to something, Greg, you just mentioned a little while ago, which is in comparing to T-Index, the things that people would bring up over the past few years in T-Index, why don't you look at away score? I was club champion. This person won club champion, senior club champion back in the Midwest. How come those don't show up in our tournament index? It's a tournament. But like Greg was saying, we have so many clubs, so many members. It's very hard to evaluate those. But the USGA has that information. They have said, hey, this was a competition round. It was conducted by a committee, peer-reviewed, signed for, posted. It's going to measure that competition round at all competition scores posted in there. Somebody else might mention that, well, sure, I didn't post my scores, but I never win in a tournament, Greg. How can you send me a letter about posting scores when I never win a tournament? That's the category we just talked about, which is standing on the podium. Mm-hmm. It's going to look at multiple factors and say, okay, maybe you didn't post all your scores, but you're not shooting your potential in tournaments. You're not standing on the podium. I'm not telling you it's okay to not post scores, but it looks at it fairly now to where let's look at all the data, and if somebody's out of line with their potential, we look at that person in particular instead of just looking at everybody that is shooting low tournament scores statically, or looking at everybody that's not posting scores statically without looking at all the other data. Cap Patrol does a very good job of looking at all the data.
So we go ahead and we now get to the end of the month. You run these reports, run it for the Handicap Committee. We take a look. We see that there are those adjustments that are in there. So let's talk about how do we use those adjustments? How are those adjustments, affect somebody that's playing in a group, playing in a tournament, playing just casually day to day with their spouse or their friends?
Good question. And I think we're working through all this, to be honest. Like, we had a meeting literally last Thursday as to should we use this process or revert back to T-index. We wanted to make sure we understood the data. The Handicap Committee came up with the conclusion that we want to go forward with this. It's more robust, it's more specific, and it is accurate. But having said that, we're going to use it mostly for tournaments. How often do we update it? Good question. We'll probably figure that out after member. It's certainly going to affect member for both the ladies and the men, amigos and amigas. And the way that the data works is because it's adjusting, and some of these categories are for 12 months or 24 months in one of the categories. I think we'll need to adjust it for at least the big tournaments. This is Greg's view. Again, we've not discussed it with the Handicap Committee, but I would see us having to rerun the numbers for Radler, rerun the numbers for the club championship, because, again, that's 4 months away, right?
That's accurate. That's 100% accurate because, like we mentioned before, this is now compliant with the World Handicap System. It updates daily, just like your index updates daily. So the time we run, and this may be good information for everybody to know, but we always run handicaps at the close of registration for every tournament so that we're consistent. So looking at Dos Amigos, Dos Amigas that are coming up, we will close off registration a week before, and the next morning I'll run the handicaps for all the participants, and I'll also run the Cap Patrol report for all participants. So we're measuring everybody fairly, both on Cap Patrol and an index, measuring it for the same time. So if somebody's Cap Patrol number, which is a factor of all those things we just got done talking about, would indicate that their potential is significantly different than what their current index is, and that might be for something the committee to look at, make an adjustment on. That's going to be looking at the most current data for everybody in the field at the same time, which is the fairest thing to do for everybody in the field, is looking at the data that same day on both sides. And then it will update again because the next day, all those scores could potentially change. Your low handicap, your high handicap, all those things potentially could change on a daily basis.
But they're locked in 1 week out at where registration
Correct.
is. Okay,
Correct.
for that particular event.
Yep.
Okay.
So no matter what happens from, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, leading into the tournament, we've already downloaded the information, and that's static at that point. But something you brought up, which is how we notify, when will you let players know? Greg's already on that. He was on the list, and he already had to notify himself.
Had to send myself a little
That's a hard look in the mirror.
Like Greg, yeah. So, in fact, related to that, so there are a number of people that are affected. We looked at the list as a team, and although Sean hasn't drawn that number, we kind of know who's in the camp. And I've reached out to everybody and spoken to everybody except for 2 people as of this moment. And everybody, after understanding how it works, has been really, I think appreciative of the fact that it's a little bit more robust. There has been, a little bit of feedback that's like, well, why am I being penalized for playing better in tournaments versus others? And you're like, well, that's how we level the playing field, right? I mean,
right.
At the end of the day, that's our best way of leveling the playing field. So that's what we've done. But yeah, we've reached out to most everybody, and we'll get to everybody for sure before that time is done.
I think you make a great point. You're not necessarily getting penalized. You are technically just playing, your handicap to your ability, like you talked about earlier.
Exactly
and
right.
It's fair to everybody in the event. If you're a gamer and you happen to step up and you do better in events, then, there's obviously a number there that reflects what you do, and that's what you really should be playing at.
It goes back to the word potential because if the mathematics show that you're exceeding your potential more often than you should. The handicap committee's job is to make sure that everybody is handicapped according to their potential. So the adjustment is more in line with your potential rather than a penalty. It shouldn't be looked at as we're not penalizing. Sure. It's an adjustment that puts you more in line with your potential. But also brings up something
that was a conversation I had with myself. You're really better than you are showing right now.
Are the potential stats available to the public? Am I able to see these to know who I should bet on?
Sort of. That's a good question.
It is, yeah.
There is an app that shows.
No way.
There's an app that shows. I think it's called Clutch on the app.
Right.
But it's like how much better you play. And then it also compares how much better you play in tournaments versus everybody else in the club.
Wow.
So it is actually interesting. But there's another category that's a good one to look at, which is how cold or hot you are. It's kind of a fun little app. I'm ice cold, and I'm gonna.
It's because you got ice in your
playing to
brain,
another potential. So I wouldn't bet on me on this.
Right. Yes. We figured that the ice cold hot scale was the betting scale, right?
Yeah, that's probably the better one to check.
So Greg's taking a hit on his handicap, but he's ice cold right now, so he's not a good. He's got the double whammy.
It's kind of like my fantasy football.
Right.
I like it.
Exactly.
That works great.
A question that'll come up, and I think we kind of touched on, which is what will be the adjustment. Greg already indicated he's probably going to have adjustment, but we haven't decided yet. Like you said,
that's what I was going to ask next.
We'll run that number a week out of every tournament. But the before, when we had T-index, it was based on your best tournament scores, either 1 or I think in some cases we might have had some people that had 8 out of 20 scores, but that was somebody who played every tournament over a 2-year period, which was tough to do. So this one basically, this will be an adjustment that will be to your, at the most significant adjustment would be to your low index. And that's a number that everybody has. If you go to GIN right now, if you have a handicap, you can go to GIN right now and find out what your low index is, and it's what your lowest index has been for the past 12 months. So the adjustment the committee is making is nothing than what you have been at some point over the past 12 months.
Is that how it will work? It'll never be lower than
the
that.
one that's lower than that is if your tournament scores, the potential category you talked about, if you play tournament scores significantly better than your current low index, then you could go lower. That's a rare exception. There could be some. Now
it's a big red flag.
Yeah, exactly. If your low index was 6 months ago, but your tournament scoring history shows they're even better than that, that's something the committee would look at and say, okay, well, this adjustment's going to go down just a little bit lower because your tournament scoring record indicates that you're even better than your low index is. But that's if you were playing in tournament play, that would be something post-tournament round. You would look at how does that person always win? Well, their low index, they're even better than the low index when it comes to tournaments. Sure. That's tough to do. But there are people that do that.
Right. Well, those will be adjusted.
And then the other adjustment that I didn't mention on that one, it's a little bit less adjustment. I think this is the one that you fell in, Greg, which is it's 50% of your low index to your current index. So if I'm a 10 right now, but my low index 6 months ago was 8.0, then I'm going to have a 9 in the tournament. It's a 50% adjustment. And that's for someone who doesn't trip all the red flags, but does trip some significant ones that the committee would look at and say, okay, this is an adjustment needed. And the committee did do something at the last meeting. We looked at what all the players' T-indexes were compared to their cap adjustments. And when you look at it line for line, it made sense. Those that were taking T-index or those who were taking the full low index adjustment were actually taking less of an adjustment than their T-index. So they're happier people.
In almost every case, the T-index was a bit more harsh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then on the other ones, we're taking the 50% adjustment. It was almost in line with what their T-index would have been. So in comparison to what we've been doing for the past 8 years to what we're going to do, we're finding a more significant way to measure the player's potential. But also, if you want to compare it to what we've been doing, it's working out to be okay. And what we're not doing is hitting people like Greg mentioned before that may have just played one round of golf and played really well. New member, I got to play one round of the Amigos where I posted the score, and I played really good that day. Played bad on the team part of it, but that doesn't get measured in. And now I'm having a handicap hit for one really good round of golf. This one looks at all the factors and says, okay, maybe there's more to it than just that.
Yeah. No, I think that's terrific. I got to tell you, our members have got to be ecstatic about playing in tournaments now with just feeling like they can compete on an even playing ground. And I think we'll see some new faces on the podium. I don't think it'll be the same faces over and over. I think it'll it'll certainly create some parity and spread out the tournament winnings. And I'm excited.
So you think that's probably the biggest benefit to the members through this whole thing is playing in the tournaments with this new?
I think it's just making the field fair, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're doing as much as we can, which is what a handicap committee's job is to do, right? Is to make it a fair field. If I played to a better potential in tournaments, then as you say, then my potential is, a 9, not a 12, or whatever it is.
Right. It's you shouldn't look at it as we're putting someone in a position where they can't win. In fact, this summer we had a tournament, we had to adjust somebody to their low index, and they still won. Mm-hmm. It's not out of line. The low index is still somebody's potential, and if you get adjusted to it, it doesn't automatically rule you out of any events. In fact, you're still very competitive because it is who you are.
I always like to say to the people that call me, and I get a few calls on these topics, because they'll take the hit. And I'll be like, look, for me, like 2 shots, that's 1 ball out of bounds in a 3-day tournament, right? If I can eliminate 1 ball out of bounds in a 3-day tournament,
you're back to square.
That's my 2 strokes. Right? And by the way, I need to eliminate more than 1 of those.
Per hole for me, personally, but yeah.
But anyway, that's...
And Sean, I think you touched on it, but I'm just curious, personally, when it's a team score, that does not count towards...
The only scores that get posted to Jen are your individual scores. So
Okay.
if it's a team event where we're both playing our own ball,
Right.
yes, that'll get posted.
Okay.
And it's a competition score. But if we're playing a alternate shot, that's not a format that we can post that score
Okay.
of. So if we have a competition where the first day is a best ball, you and I are both playing our own ball, but the next day is a alternate shot, we're both sharing a golf ball.
Okay.
Then we're going to have 1 score in there. And it certainly comes up that, Sean played really well on the best ball portion, that score gets posted. But then I played horrible on the scramble. My partner was mad at me all day long because I just couldn't hold my alternate shot game together. But, the T index would never reflect that. But now let's just say that that score gets posted, but we still stand on the podium. I didn't play. I played bad, but you held us together, and we still stood on the podium. This system will reflect that now because we're still winning, and I'm still on the podium, even though I played bad one day and didn't hold up our team.
Okay.
You held us together.
Go back to that tournament point system.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, one of the main 5, but something that's one of the 42 that factor all in.
Right.
All right, thank you very much, guys. And real quick, speaking of reaching the podium, Desert Mountain member Barry Conser won the championship title at the 25th Energy Transferred Texas Senior Open recently. We just got that coming over our desk. So congratulations.
Awesome
how cool is that?
Yeah, what are you
talking
shoot?
about all this?
That's pretty cool.
He scored. He had rounds of 73 and 67 for a 36-hole score of 2 under.
140.
Yeah,
Good
140.
playing.
Yeah,
Really good playing.
Pretty impressive. Good to see Desert Mountain members making waves on the course.
Barry's a terrific player. And his brother Brian, he works for us up at Chiricahua. And Brian actually qualified to play in the National Club Professional Championship this year.
Wow.
And made the cut the first day and got down to the final cut on the last day. I think it was the final 32, and he missed it by 1.
Oh.
1 stroke.
Wow.
Good player. So there's a lot of good golf genes in that family.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool.
Bear's going to have to expand his trophy case if he keeps winning at the rate he's been winning.
He might be a guest on the podcast pretty soon at this rate, right?
There you go.
All right.
Love it. Well, this is great. Thank you, Sean, Greg.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys very much. Yeah,
putting this
appreciate having
podcast
all
together.
three on at the same time. It was nice to see that on the schedule coming up. So we've been looking forward to this one for sure.
I hope our
appreciate
members, listen to this, enjoy it, pass it on to your friends if they want to know more about it, because certainly the only way to effectively communicate is to get everybody on the same page and get them to understand the real information that's out there and not make it up.
I may have to start talking about it on these turf talks too, John.
These turf talks are going long enough. They're tired of hearing about grass and Todd and myself.
Well, as you all know, I think, and you, Mr. Castor, you were saying you've been watching or listening to the podcast.
I haven't.
We have trivia questions that we do here. So
Excellent.
with the theme of today in mind, I think we'll just stick to handicaps. Right?
Okay.
Perfect.
The question this week for the members is, and thank you, by the way, to the members for participating in these. We have a lot of fun with these. What is the lowest and highest handicap on the mountain? So
Index. Lowest index, highest index.
Yeah. So a two-parter, lowest and
questions.
highest. Yeah.
Pretty
We won't name
diverse
names
group of people. Yeah. We got, that'll be an interesting one.
All the members out there listening or watching on YouTube, go ahead and get those submissions into marketing@desertmt.com. We're looking forward to that. And last week, and actually today is day of play. Last week was our trivia question for that.
Who was on?
It was how many scholarships had been.
That's right. It was an easy answer because
and it was
Craig had already said what it was.
yeah, well, he said it was in the 90s, I think, but the answer was 90 on the nose, and I think he tried to backtrack from that, from saying it might be 89. Yeah. But the answer to last week's question is 90 on the nose to how many scholarships have been assisted with through the day of play. So thank you to all the members that have submitted their questions or their answers to that question as well. Now, this is my favorite part of the podcast, and you guys, I think you each have a sheet here for this one.
Yes, absolutely.
The shots around the mountain. And I'm always shocked at how little 7 we get. Submissions from 7, like no holes in one, hole in ones.
Yeah, well, we track them and we report them, but recently, I guess those hole locations must be too difficult.
Yeah, recently we had Sandra Pitana. She had an eagle on Renegade number 7. So golf clap on that. Yeah. We had Marilyn De Linton. She aced number 3 Apache. Congratulations on the golf clap. Carrie Redinger, another ace on Renegade. Number 4. Yeah. Golf clap. And Marcus Ellison, another ace on Apache number 7 on Halloween. How about
awesome.
that?
Spooky
That's
ace.
Spooky. And again, no 7.
No.
I just figured that by sheer volume of par 3s, there would be some more aces happening.
There were some
on
close.
7,
There were some close ones
some
on Glow
close
Golf.
calls. Yeah,
We
on
had
Glow Golf.
We had
That's
Glow
right.
Golf 7 on
That would be the way to do it.
Our team almost had one of those. Scott Gordon.
Yeah, that's right.
Hit the pin, bounced a little hard back.
Of course, you made the birdie, right?
We missed the birdie.
That was a big bounce back.
Or a hard pin or a hard flag.
I guess.
Nobody would have known. You just counted as an ace and put it in your index. All right. I think that wraps it up for today's episode, gentlemen. So I appreciate you again, everybody. This is usually where we do a cheers. Do you guys have a cup with you?
I do.
Oh, boy. He doesn't. Sean doesn't.
There you go, Sean. You can
But
have
thank you all again. Oh, there we go. All right. Perfect.
All right.
So thank you. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the near future, but this has been fantastic. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you around the mountain.
Alrighty.
Thank you, members. Cheers.
Happy golfing.